Good morning, everybody. I'd like to honour the people, the traditional owners on whose land we are meeting today, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners in whose land I regularly work, the Thalangi people, the Gumala and the Yamaji. The research project that I have oversight of, the program is three-pronged. It's analysing resource activities in remote areas of Australia, most particularly in the Northern Territory, South Australia and Northern Western Australia, and how those activities could be translated into a flow of enduring benefits to those communities, and particularly small to medium enterprises during and beyond the mine's life. We're also trying to assess the size and flows of benefits and costs associated with resource industries and the related processing activities, where these impacts are felt spatially and by whom, and at what period or at what stage of the mine life. And the third part is developing evidence-based strategies to assist remote communities affected by resource operations to manage risk and to take advantage of the opportunities presented by virtue of mining activities and to become more resilient through enduring community value. The project activities are, as I said, in Northern Territory, South Australia and Western Australia. In the Northern Territory, it's at the moment located around the Jabiru and the Granites in the Tanami. In South Australia, Roxbury Downs and Lee Creek, and in Western Australia, Onslow and Tom Price, both of which are in the Shire of Ashburton. And as of Tuesday this week, we have a new master's student who will be undertaking research in the Kimberley. We have one postdoc, 3 PhD students and a master's student, and thus far we've had 3 work experience students, one of whom has graduated from our desks and has a real job working in the local government authority in the northwest. So, reporting the impacts. There is no surprises in that we have found that mining activities do indeed present direct employment opportunities, but for many residents and communities in remote communities, there are more opportunities and potential for enduring benefits that are derived from support services rather than actively being involved in the construction and operational large corporate companies. From the work that we've done, particularly in the Pilbara area, the epicentre of the iron ore industry, it's very clear that those people who are permanently in those communities are likely to have a potential business through small to medium enterprises. It's also very clear that mining has dramatic impacts on communities, most particularly from long-distance commuting, poor strategic planning, and that's life cycle planning, and one of our PhD students in South Australia is examining that. And it's very clear that without a prescient state government leadership, the lag between corporate decisions and the necessary infrastructure to support communities with services being put in place in time to adequately provide the opportunities for residents to live and workers to live around the mining industry, things implode very quickly. And our case study site in Onslow, where Chevron made a decision to go ahead with the offshore gas development, but there was not, or there is not, the housing, the infrastructure, the power or the water to adequately support that industry, and we're beginning to see some very ugly outcomes. It's also clear that in many of the mining communities we have population churn, and for some communities that population churn is not a problem at all. They see it as an opportunity for new people, new skills, new ideas, new commitment to community. In other communities, particularly in the Pilbara, we've seen population churn viewed as a negative, and it's really taken some of those community leaders a lot of energy to try and turn that negative perspective around particularly with long-distance commuting, to ensure that there's a more positive spin around mining activities. So the impacts. Long-distance commuting, we've just finished a report on long-distance commuting and who benefits from long-distance commuting, which communities benefit from long-distance commuting. It's very clear that more could be done by companies, including contractors, including resource companies and construction companies, to ensure communities derive benefits from long-distance commuting, most particularly from infrastructure that is built specifically for the mining industry workforce, which the local community would like to have access to. But it's balancing who has access at what time and fitting in with the time structures and the life cycle of the mine as to who has access and when. It's also very clear that all spheres of government have a responsibility to ensure communities derive benefits from long-distance mining, that they don't necessarily underwrite that activity, but they take an interest, and that their leadership role is very clearly understood and articulated at the state level, but also at the community level. And there is very clearly benefits from long-distance commuting which could be better captured and understood. Some of those include broad income distribution across all regions, containment of transient workforces. It limits the growth pressures from non-resident workforces. And as my colleague in Canada, Keith Story, says, you've got to be careful what you wish for. And to have a large population living in your local community puts enormous pressures. And while the large corporates, the Rio Tintos, the BHPs, the Fortescues, provide work camps, it means that you contain some of those growth pressures. Large corporations, through their corporate social responsibility programs, also provide communities with cultural and infrastructure investments that wouldn't otherwise be there in some of these very small communities. And there are opportunities for SMEs, small to medium enterprises, to develop. And probably one of the most enduring in the town of Tom Price is Ash Oil. Ash Oil is a small Aboriginal-owned small to medium enterprise. It collects used cooking oil from mine sites around the Pilbara region, which would otherwise be dumped in local tips. And the Ash Oil Company then refines into environmentally responsible biodiesel, and they sell that back to Rio Tinto, about 7,000 litres a week, back to Rio Tinto as drill and blast installation at the mines around the Pilbara. This has been a small enterprise that's been going through it from since 2006. It's grown slowly, but it's also grown very presciently with good relationships developed with the mining companies. And I have to say Rio Tinto has been at the forefront of giving opportunities to these small companies and really taking a risk that they will be there for the long term. So the achievements thus far, we've had very good relationships with several mining companies, and that's been absolutely critical because without those mining companies encouraging their staff to meet with us, to participate in some of these research projects, to share some of their data, we wouldn't have been able to achieve some of the work that we have done thus far. We are enabling, particularly through data collection collected at the company level, to track and map labour force mobility and workforce income dispersion and regional economic leakage. We've also successfully negotiated with the Department of Justice in Western Australia to undertake different reporting throughout regional Western Australia and remote Western Australia, tracking domestic violence, drug and alcohol abuse, and incidents of crime by employees who identify as being long-distance commuters. Because despite the popular media vilifying long-distance commuting, it would appear, in fact, that there is the same level of incidence of crime, drug and alcohol abuse and domestic violence in long-distance commuting populations as in the general population. So it's been a very handy way of sheeting through to a community of workers, which has really been unfair. It's been through the Department of Justice, I guess, lobbying us for the development of policies, or assisting them with the development of policies based on statistically sound, grounded evidence on which to base future counselling and remedial programs, and in particular to develop effective delivery of programs to workers and residents who don't necessarily have conventional work arrangements. And as the Director General of the West Australian Department of Justice commented 2 weeks ago, this is actually having a broader benefit, not restricted to the mining industry, but in fact for many industries where 12-hour shifts or block time work commitments and long-distance commuting is not necessarily limited to the mining industry. So these innovations at the Department of Justice are really very useful for a number of different communities, not limited to mining. We've also started to understand local economies in remote communities. We're beginning to see what is a commuting worker, and as I mentioned, it's not necessarily limited to the mining industry. And we're beginning to see where families move to, why they move, what keeps people in communities, what pushes them out. And this is very useful at policy level, but it's also very important for local government authorities when they're trying to budget for infrastructure, for social programs and economic development programs, that in fact they could be wasting important budget allocations if they are trying to encourage people to stay or to come, when in fact there's no likelihood of them coming at all. We have also been able to, I guess, extend some of the benefits to small-scale and very much more dependent small to medium enterprises in some of these remote communities. And it would appear that community leaders are beginning to understand that people will stay if there are the aesthetic attributes of a community, if communities make mining workforce welcome, if there is an understanding and a willingness of people and business to collaborate to secure social, cultural and community benefits. And it's really interesting in the work that we do, being able to go to some of these communities where they really pull together and are trying to understand what it is that they take from mining and what it is that they see the future of their community, whether it's with mining or without. And then you go to another community which is absolutely sees their future dependent on a mine or perhaps a gas development, when in fact their understanding and their perception of what that industry will give them is probably quite misguided. So I hope that our work will assist communities to better understand their future, to give them solid statistical information about how they might make more prescient decisions, and most particularly investment, not only by corporate and state governments, but small communities which work hard to allocate in a very clever way their budgets to encourage small to medium enterprises which will probably be there long after the long distance commuting workforce has been there, and maybe even when the mine's gone. So thank you.